cardboard box in Malik Reeves' hands held almost nothing. A chipped coffee mug with a faded drawing of a school bus on the side, a phone charger wound twice around itself, and a single manila folder with the corners worn soft from handling. He carried it through the center of the open office floor at Whitfield Logistics, past 40 desks where nobody quite looked at him and nobody quite looked away either. Somewhere behind him, laughter rose and fell, sharp and unhurried, the kind of laughter people allow themselves only when they are certain they've already won. Diane Foster stood near the glass doors of her office, arms crossed, sipping from a mug that said "World's Okayest Boss," a gift someone had given her as a joke that she now wore as a badge of honor. She wasn't smiling exactly. She was doing something more careful than that, the particular stillness of a woman enjoying a moment she didn't want to be caught enjoying. Malik reached the elevator bank and pressed a button. He didn't turn around. A security guard named Pete, who had worked the lobby for 11 years and had shaken Malik's hand every single morning without knowing who he really was, walked a few steps behind him, close enough to look official, far enough to look uncomfortable about it. The elevator doors opened. Malik stepped inside. As they slid shut, he caught one last glimpse of the 14th floor, the fluorescent lights, the rows of gray cubicles, the woman named Priya Anand staring at her monitor with her jaw tight, not moving, not breathing, the exact way people learn to hold themselves when reacting honestly has never once been safe. The doors closed. In the lobby, Malik didn't stop at the front desk. He didn't stop at the revolving doors. He walked out onto the concrete steps of the building into a gray afternoon that smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet, and he set the box down on a low stone wall beside the entrance. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a single contact, saved under one letter. He pressed call. It connected before the second ring finished. His voice, when he spoke, was level, almost gentle, the voice of a man ordering coffee, not the voice of a man who had just been marched out of building in front of 80 of his coworkers. Fire every one of them. He ended the call. He picked up the box. And somewhere on the 14th floor of a building he'd walked into as a stranger 9 weeks earlier, the walls that Diane Foster had spent 4 years building around herself had already, without her knowing it yet, begun to come down. But to understand why a man who had just lost his job could say 4 words like that and mean every syllable of them, you have to go back before the box, back before the elevator, back to a small apartment on the east side of the city where a 7-year-old girl named Malik Reeves was learning to tie her own shoelaces, and her father was the only person in the world who believed she'd get it on the first try. 9 weeks earlier, the alarm on Malik's phone went off at 5:40 in the morning, the way it did every weekday, the way it had for the last 3 years. He didn't hit snooze. He never did. Somewhere along the road of raising a daughter alone, Malik had learned that the first decision of the day set the tone for every decision after it. And the first decision was always the same. Get up. He moved through the small kitchen quietly, measuring oatmeal into a pot, cutting a banana into careful coins the way Nia liked it, not mashed, not sliced too thin. The apartment held a particular hush of early morning. Streetlights still on outside the window, the radiator ticking as it warmed. At 6:15, he walked down the short hallway and knocked twice on a door covered in stickers of planets and one crooked drawing of a dog. Morning, baby girl. A small voice, thick with sleep, answered from beneath a mountain of blankets. 5 more minutes. You said that 4 minutes ago. Then 1 more minute. Malik smiled in the dark hallway where she couldn't see it. Because some things a father does for himself and not for an audience. 1 minute, then shoes. Nia was 7 years old, all elbows and stubbornness, with her mother's slow, careful way of studying a problem before she attacked it. Her mother, Danielle, had passed 3 years earlier after a short illness that the doctors had fought hard against and lost anyway. Malik didn't talk about it much. He didn't need to. Every one of Nia's expressions carried a piece of her mother in it, and some mornings that was the hardest and best part of his day, all at once. By 6:45, Nia sat at the kitchen table working the double knot Malik had shown her twice, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. I almost got it. You got it last week. I got it different last week. He crouched down to eye level. Show me your different way. She did. It wasn't perfect. It held anyway. Malik nodded like she just solved something enormous. Because to a 7-year-old, tying a shoe correctly was something enormous, and a father's job, he believed, was never to tell a child their victories were small. The walk to school took 11 minutes. Nia narrated most of it. A cloud that looked like a dinosaur, a dog that barked at literally everything, a boy in her class named Tobias who ate paste and swore he didn't. Malik listened to all of it the way he listened to everything that mattered to her, completely, without checking his phone, without half a mind somewhere else. At the school gate, she turned and hugged him around the middle, the way she always did, quick and fierce. Are you going to be late tonight? Not tonight. I promise. You said that Tuesday. Tuesday was different. She studied him with the same slow suspicion her mother used to have. Okay, but I'm telling Mrs. Alvarez you promised. Tell her. I'll take the blame. She ran through the gate without looking back, backpack bouncing, and Malik stood there a moment longer than necessary, the way he did most mornings, before turning toward the train that would take him to a job that, as far as anyone at Whitfield Logistics knew, was the only job he'd ever wanted. What none of them knew. Not Diane Foster, not the clique of coworkers who orbited her like moons around a small, cold planet, not even the security guard who greeted him every morning by name, was that Malik Reeves did not need this job. He did not need the salary, modest as it was for a data operations analyst. He did not need the health insurance, though he was grateful for it, because Nia's asthma inhaler wasn't cheap and neither was peace of mind. What Malik needed, the only thing he actually needed from Whitfield Logistics, was the truth. And the only way to find the truth inside a company, his father had told him once, was to walk to the front door like nobody and see what nobody gets to see. Solomon Reeves was 74 years old and had built Whitfield Logistics up from a single delivery contract and a rented warehouse in 1986 into one of the largest privately held freight and distribution companies on the East Coast. He had done it with philosophy, so simple most people mistook it for naivety. A company is only as strong as the way it treats the person with the least power in the room. He said it at every leadership retreat. He believed it the way other men believed in Scripture. 2 years earlier, doctors had found something on Solomon's lungs that made the decision for him. He needed to step back. And there was only one person he trusted to take his seat, but he had one condition, delivered the way Solomon delivered every important thing in his life, quietly and without room for negotiation. You don't walk into that boardroom until you walk the floor first, he told Malik over dinner one evening, Nia asleep upstairs, the two of them alone at the kitchen table that had once belonged to Malik's grandmother. Anybody can read a balance sheet. Son, not everybody can tell you what it's like to be the person nobody in that building bothers to learn the name of. You want to run this company, right? You go find out. Quietly. No title. No warning. Malik hadn't argued. It matched something he already believed. Something he learned doing supply chain consulting work overseas for 6 years after business school, that the truest measurement of any organization wasn't in its quarterly reports. It was in the small, unrecorded moments. Who got blamed for what, who got credit for what, and who got to speak in a meeting without their voice shaking. So 9 weeks before the box, before the elevator, before 4 words that would end 4 careers in a single afternoon, Malik Reeves walked into Whitfield Logistics wearing plain gray trousers and a shirt that had been ironed but not expensively so, and told the HR coordinator his name was Malik, and he'd be starting as a data operations analyst on the 14th floor. Nobody looked twice. That was exactly the point. The 14th floor of Whitfield Logistics handled internal reporting, inventory reconciliation, vendor compliance, regional shipment audits. It wasn't glamorous work. It was, Malik understood almost immediately, the floor where a company's actual character revealed itself, because nobody important was watching. Diane Foster ran the floor the way a woman runs, something she spent years being afraid of losing. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-suited, quick with a compliment when someone useful was listening, and quicker with a correction when they weren't. She had two people she trusted completely. Craig Delaney, a loud man in his 30s who had a gift for turning other people's work into his own sentences, and Tasha Meyer, quieter, more careful, the kind of person who watched the room before she said a word in it and made sure every word aligned with whoever held the power. On Malik's first morning, Diane looked him over exactly once, decided he wasn't worth a second look, and handed him a stack of vendor reconciliation reports 3 days overdue. "See what you can do with these," she said, already walking away. "Try not to need hand-holding." Malik sat down and got to work without a word. The data was a mess, mismatched formats, duplicate entries, missing timestamps. Tedious, not difficult. He had it cleaned and cross-referenced by the end of the day, a task that had apparently defeated 2 previous analysts. He didn't announce it. He simply filed the corrective reports in the shared drive and moved to the next task. 2 days later, he overheard Craig telling Diane that the vendor reconciliation, the one he'd apparently pulled an all-nighter on, had impressed the regional compliance director. Diane nodded, pleased, and copied Craig on the follow-up email to leadership. Malik's name did not appear anywhere in the thread. He read the email once, closed his laptop, and went to refill his coffee. He wasn't angry. He was paying attention. There is a difference, and Malik had learned a long time ago which ones serve you better. Over the following weeks, a pattern revealed itself with almost mechanical consistency. Good outcomes belonged to Craig or Tasha, or, when it mattered enough, to Diane herself. Bad outcomes, a missed deadline, a miscommunication between departments, a shipment logged incorrectly, found their way to whoever on the floor had the least power to object. More often than not, that was Malik. Sometimes it was Priya Anand, a compliance analyst who had been at the company 6 years and had the tired, careful posture of someone who had learned that reacting honestly had a cost she couldn't afford. Malik watched one particular afternoon as Diane corrected Priya in front of the entire floor over a minor formatting error. Her voice pitched just loud enough to make sure everyone heard it. Priya said, "Yes, I understand. I'll fix it," in a voice so controlled it was almost a performance, and then sat very still at her desk for a long moment after Diane walked away, staring at her screen without moving. Malik noticed the stillness more than the correction. It was the stillness of someone who had learned, over years, that any visible reaction would be used against her later. He filed it away. He filed all of it away. The lunch invitations extended just loudly enough for him to hear and never actually offered to him. The questions and meetings designed to expose gaps rather than gather information. The deliverables assigned at 4:50 in the afternoon with deadlines the next morning, and never quite enough information to complete them cleanly. None of it, on its own, would hold up as a formal complaint. That was its genius. Each piece looked small enough to explain away. Together, they formed something deliberate. Every morning, Malik ran 5 miles before the sun came up, using the quiet hour to think without the noise of the office pressing in on him. On those runs, he thought about his father's words. A company is only as strong as the way it treats the person with the least power in the room. He had expected, coming into this experiment, to find the ordinary friction of any workplace. Some politics, some inefficiency, the occasional personality clash. What he found instead was something colder. A structure, a shared, unspoken agreement about who was protected and who was disposable. He thought about it every night after Neil went to bed, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop, writing down what he'd observed in a private file he didn't share with anyone, not even his father, not yet. Not because he was building a case, because he wanted to understand the shape of the problem before he decided what to do about it. And every night, without fail, he closed the laptop by 9, because there was a rule in a Reeves household that mattered more than any audit. Bedtime stories didn't wait for anybody's job. Read the one about the lighthouse. Nia said one night, climbing under her covers with particular seriousness, she brought to bedtime negotiations. Again, You always ask that. You always say yes anyway. He laughed despite himself. You got me there. She fell asleep somewhere around the third page, the way she usually did, her hand still gripping the edge of the blanket, like she might need to defend it. Malik sat there a while longer, watching her breathe, thinking about a floor full of adults too afraid to say what they'd seen, and a 7-year-old girl who said exactly what she thought without a second's hesitation, and wondering which one of those was actually the healthier way to move through the world. In his third week, Diane assigned Malik to lead documentation on a sensitive internal compliance audit, the largest project he'd been given so far. It was, on its face, an opportunity. He built the tracking framework from scratch, coordinated across 3 departments, and had the initial structure ready 2 full days ahead of schedule. He shared edit access with Diane and Craig, so the rest of the team could keep building on it while he finished the final sections. It was a reasonable decision, a professional one. He would understand very soon exactly how it would be used against him. On a Thursday morning, Malik arrived to find Craig and Tasha already seated in Diane's glass-walled office, blinds drawn, unusual, since Diane liked an audience for most things. HR Director Pam Whitlow sat across from Diane, with a folder open in front of her. Malik had barely set down his bag when Pam stepped out and asked him to come in. Her expression was the practiced neutrality of someone delivering news she hadn't written. Diane stood with her arms folded. Craig sat in the corner with the particular stillness of a man who already knew how the scene would end, because he'd helped write the ending himself. Pam told him a significant volume of restricted vendor pricing data had been extracted from the audit system over the past 48 hours. The activity traced back to the access credentials Malik had used to build the tracking framework. There was, she said, a clear digital trail. Given the evidence, the company could not continue his employment. Malik asked to see the trail. Pam looked at Diane. Diane said the documentation was with legal, pending review, and wasn't available to him. Malik asked if there was a process to contest the decision. Pam said the termination was immediate and final, given the seriousness of the breach. She slid a single page across the table and asked him to sign, acknowledging receipt. Malik looked at the page for a long moment. Then he signed it. He asked for a copy. Pam gave him one. He thanked her. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Diane. He did not look at Craig. He walked back to his desk, and in full view of a floor that had gone very quiet without appearing to look at him directly, he placed his coffee mug, his phone charger, and one manila folder into a small cardboard box that Pam had left beside his chair. Priya watched from her desk without turning her head, her hands motionless on her keyboard. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. The floor understood exactly what was happening, and exactly why nobody was going to say a word about it. This was the moment the story opened on. The elevator, the box on the concrete wall, outside, the phone call, for words. But there was a difference between what Diane Foster believed had just happened and what had actually happened. And that difference was about to close the distance between them faster than anyone on the 14th floor could have imagined. The call that Malik made from the front steps went to a man named Warren Blackwood, Whitfield Logistics General Counsel, a person Diane Foster had never once had reason to speak with directly and had no idea Malik had saved as a single letter W in his phone. Warren picked up before the second ring finished, which told Malik that his father had likely already reached out to give him a heads up that something was coming, because Solomon Reeves had a way of sensing things before they arrived. "I need 3 things," Malik said, his voice even unhurried. A legal hold on every digital record from the 14th floor, going back 4 years. Emails, access logs, performance reviews, all of it. Second, I need the board convened within the hour. Third, I need a complete blackout on my identity until I say otherwise. Warren said he understood. Malik ended the call, picked up his box, and drove home. He didn't go straight back to the office. He had somewhere to be first, and it mattered more than anything happening on the 14th floor or the 32nd floor or in any boardroom in the city. At 3:15 that afternoon, Malik stood outside Nia's school with a stack of other parents, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers because her school was hosting its fall art showcase that evening, and he had promised, the kind you don't break, that he would be there early enough to see her set up her piece before the doors opened to everyone else. Nia came bursting to the doors holding a poster board covered in painted handprints shaped into a tree. Orange and red and yellow leaves fanned out from a brown trunk that was unmistakably 2 overlapping handprints. "I did the tree part myself," she announced before he'd even said hello. Mrs. Alvarez helped with the words, "but I picked the colors." "They're the exact right colors," Malik said, crouching to examine it properly, the way the moment required. "You're here early," she said, suspicious in a way only a 7-year-old paying close attention to broken promises could be. "You said you might be late." "I moved some things around." She studied his face a second longer than usual, the same slow read her mother used to give him when something wasn't quite right, and for a moment Malik thought she might ask a question he wasn't ready to answer yet. But she didn't. She grabbed his hand instead and pulled him toward the gymnasium doors, already narrating exactly where a painting needed to go and why the lighting near the window was better for orange. He didn't tell her that afternoon that he'd lost his job. There would be time for that conversation, and it deserved to happen without a hallway of parents and construction paper leaves around them. Tonight, she got a father who showed up early, who admired the tree, who let her win an argument about the best displayed table without letting on that he'd let her win it. It was, he thought later, one of the more important decisions he made that entire day, and nobody in either boardroom would ever know about it. Back at Whitfield Logistics headquarters, the building continued exactly as it had for years, unaware that anything had shifted. On the 14th floor, Diane held court near the window bank late that afternoon, speaking in the low, satisfied register of someone who believed a threat to her authority had just been successfully removed. "Sometimes you have to protect the team," she said to Craig and Tasha, sipping from her mug. "He wasn't a fit. You could tell from week 1. Craig laughed at something she said next. Tasha refreshed her email. Neither of them noticed that Pam Whitlow, who had delivered Malik's termination letter that morning, had not returned to the floor since. Neither of them connected the mandatory company-wide meeting notice that went out at 2:45. The founding chairman has an announcement regarding the company's future leadership to anything happening on their own floor. At the same time, 32 floors up, Solomon Reeves stood at the head of the boardroom table, not seated, because Solomon never sat when something needed doing. Warren Blackwood was already there with 2 members of the legal team. 2 board members appeared on a video screen at the far end of the room. Pam Whitlow sat near the end of the table, her posture careful, understanding that her position in that room had shifted considerably since delivering a termination letter she now suspected she had been used to sign. When Malik walked in, having come straight from a school gymnasium still smelling faintly of tempera paint, his father's face did something it rarely did in front of other people. It softened just slightly at the edges. Solomon confirmed the legal hold was already in effect. IT security had been pulled in to begin a parallel audit of the access logs from the compliance system. Nobody on the 14th floor had been told anything had changed. As far as Diane Foster knew, she had won. Malik stood at the table and walked the room through the last 9 weeks without notes. He described the credit misattribution, the manufactured blame, the formatting correction that had made Priya go still at her desk. He described the audit framework he'd built and how quickly it had been turned against him. Within 30 minutes, the legal team's preliminary trace confirmed what Malik had already suspected. The data extraction flagged under his credentials had originated from a device that did not match any machine he had ever logged into. The IP address resolved to a workstation registered to Craig Delaney. It wasn't sophisticated. It worked because nobody had ever bothered to check. The all-hands meeting was called for 4:30 in the atrium. High ceilings, a raised platform, enough open floor to hold the company standing shoulder to shoulder. By 4:25, the room was full, and speculation had reached a fever pitch. On the 14th floor, Diane had positioned herself near the center of the crowd with the easy confidence of a woman expecting good news, possibly even a promotion of her own. Craig stood beside her. Tasha stood a few feet back, arms crossed, watching the platform. Solomon Reeves walked out at 4:30 with the unhurried authority of a man who had built this company with his own hands and had never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. The room settled instantly. He spoke about 4 decades of building something, about handing it to the right person being the single most important decision left in his life, about needing someone who understood not just the financials, but what it actually felt like to work at every level of the company, under every condition. The next chairman of Whitfield Logistics, he said, has been inside this building for the past 9 weeks. He asked his son to come forward. Malik walked onto the platform in the same plain trousers and simple shirt he'd been fired in that morning. He carried nothing. He stood beside his father and let the silence that followed settle fully into the room. The specific, total silence of several hundred people processing something that didn't fit any category they had prepared for. Diane's face went through several rapid, uncontrolled changes. Recognition first, then calculation, then something with no clean name at all. Malik didn't deliver a speech. He introduced himself, his background, his father's condition that he began as an ordinary employee with no title and no warning. He said it had been the most instructive 9 weeks of his professional life, and that some of what he'd learned required immediate attention. Then he thanked his father, stepped aside, and asked Warren Blackwood to take the floor. Warren explained with the precise, unhurried delivery of a lawyer who is certain of his findings that in connection with personnel matter earlier that day, the legal department had begun reviewing records from a 14th floor. The review had already uncovered evidence of a fabricated data breach used to terminate an employee without cause. Further examination was revealing a broader pattern that the company took extremely seriously. All relevant personnel had been placed on immediate administrative suspension pending a full audit, expected to conclude within 24 hours. He named no one from platform. The atrium didn't erupt. It went still in the particular way a room goes still when something significant enough has been said that people stop performing their reactions and simply absorb it. Malik looked out at the crowd and thought about Priya, sitting motionless at her desk absorbing a public correction that had nothing to do with her competence. He thought about how many people on that floor had been enduring something similar for years, calculating exactly what it would cost to speak up, and deciding every time that it cost too much. That wasn't an accident. That had been the design. Malik was at his desk on the 32nd floor. By 6 the next morning, the city outside still gray, the skyline not yet fully defined by daylight. Warren arrived at 6:15 with completed audit in a bound folder and a copy on a secure drive. They worked through it together for 2 hours. The findings were worse than what Malik had personally witnessed. Over 4 years, the team under Diane Foster's supervision had suppressed the advancement of at least 9 employees through manipulated performance reviews. 3 of them had filed informal complaints through internal channels. All 3 complaints had been routed, whether by design or by simple structural failure, straight back to Diane's level, where they had been logged as resolved without any real investigation. One employee had left the company entirely after a sudden, poorly substantiated negative review appeared in her file within 2 weeks of raising concern. Another had been quietly transferred. A third had accepted a confidential settlement and never been contacted again. Pam Whitlow's name appeared in 2 of the 3 complaint files as the HR point of contact, a detail Malik noted without comment and set aside for a separate, more careful conversation. Beyond the individual cases, the data confirmed the systemic credit routing Malik had witnessed with his own eyes. Craig Delaney's name appeared in favorable project summaries at a rate entirely disconnected from his actual contributions. Tasha Meyer had managed the internal paperwork in a way that made the misattribution nearly impossible to trace, without exactly the kind of systematic review that had never before been conducted. Diane sat above all of it, approving, authorizing, occasionally directing, her fingerprints not always visible on the surface, but unmistakable in the structure underneath. Malik closed the folder and looked out the window for a long moment. "What's the exposure if we don't act decisively?" he asked. Significant and growing, Warren said. The settled employee alone is a liability that reopens the moment it becomes public that the company had evidence of systemic misconduct and chose to manage it quietly. That's not the direction, Malik said. The real decision, the one he'd been carrying since the previous evening, wasn't whether to act. That had been settled the moment he read Priya's file at midnight. Sitting at his kitchen table long after Nia had gone to bed, the lamp above him the only light left burning in the apartment. The real decision was scope and precision. Firing Diane, Craig, and Tasha was straightforward. The evidence was specific and documented. But the audit had identified 4 other team members who had participated at varying levels. Some actively, some through the kind of silence that protects the system rather than disrupts it. 2 of those 4 had themselves been targeted by Diane's inner circle in earlier years before finding it easier to align with the structure than keep resisting it. That history didn't excuse them. It complicated the question of what real accountability looked like inside an environment that had been built deliberately to make integrity expensive. Malik decided that Pam Whitlow would remain in her role under a formal review, her future determined by its outcome, not by the mood of a single morning. It was a harder line to draw than the others, and he drew it anyway, because acting on incomplete evidence in either direction would set the wrong precedent for every decision that came after it. By 9 that morning, the terminations were finalized. Diane Foster, Craig Delaney, Tasha Meyer, and the 4 additional employees whose participation the audit had documented. Each termination letter named the specific conduct behind it, not a vague, generic separation notice. The 2 former employees who had left after filing complaints would be contacted directly within the week, and the company would make them whole. The employee who had accepted a settlement would be reached as well, with care, not speed. Malik rode the elevator down to the 14th floor for the first time since his own termination the previous morning. He hadn't announced the visit. The desk belonging to Diane, Craig, and Tasha sat empty and would remain that way. The rest of the floor moved through the day at half capacity. People present but not really working. Waiting. He asked if everyone could gather. It took less than a minute. He didn't stand behind a podium or a desk. He stood in the open floor space and spoke at a normal volume, which was more than enough for the room to hear every word. I want to be direct about what happened and what's going to happen next, he said. The audit is complete. The decisions are final. I'm not here to explain myself or ask for your approval. I'm here because people in this room worked in a particular environment for years, and some of you were harmed by it. And I think you deserve to hear that from me directly instead of through a memo. He told them the evaluation system that had governed the floor was suspended immediately, and every performance record from the last 4 years would be reviewed by an independent team before it could be used for anything going forward. He told them a formal reporting channel would open within the week that bypassed management entirely, going straight to legal and to him. Priya raised her hand. She asked whether the review would affect decisions already made, promotions denied, roles people had been passed over for. Yes, Malik said. That's exactly what it's designed to correct. She nodded and lowered her hand. Nothing dramatic passed across her face. Just a small, quiet release of something she had been holding carefully in place for a very long time. Malik noticed it. He didn't comment on it. He just noticed it, the way he'd learned to notice things on this floor over the past 9 weeks, and filed away, this time as something worth protecting rather than something worth documenting. A man near the back, a project coordinator who'd been on the floor almost 3 years, asked if people who had stayed silent would be penalized. The review is focused on documented participation, Malik said, not on silence. I understand staying silent here was a neutral choice. It was survival. I'm not interested in punishing people for calculating what speaking up would cost them when the system never gave them a safe way to do it. I'm interested in making sure that calculation never has to happen again. The coordinator nodded and lowered his hand. Several people around him exhaled. Quietly, the kind of breath that had been held for longer than a single conversation. Diane called the main legal line that afternoon, asking to speak with Malik directly. Warren relayed the message. Malik told him to put her through. The call lasted 11 minutes. Diane didn't open with an apology. She opened with context. The pressure from above, the competitive culture she'd inherited when she took the role, the target she'd been expected to hit were a fraction of the resources other floors received. Malik listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her he'd read the full audit, including the years predating the most recent incidents, and the pattern it documented wasn't the product of external pressure. It was a sustained choice made repeatedly over 4 years that had damaged real people's careers and, in some cases, their livelihoods. The decision isn't changing, he said. I gave this company 8 years, Diane said. I understand that, Malik said. The severance terms are consistent with your contract and the company's obligations. He thanked her for the call and ended it. Craig didn't call. Tasha sent a written appeal through a personal attorney, arguing her role had been administrative rather than directive. The legal team responded in writing, with the relevant sections of the audit attached, and nothing further came of it. That evening, Malik came home later than he wanted to, but not so late that he broke the promise that actually mattered. Nia was at the kitchen table finishing homework, a math worksheet covered in careful, oversized numbers, and she looked up the moment he walked through the door the way she always did, checking his face for information before he'd said a word. You look tired, she said. Bad day? He set his bag down and sat across from her. There was a version of this conversation where he protected her from all of it, and a version where he told her the truth in a way a 7-year-old could hold on to without being frightened by it. He chose the second one, because he'd made a promise to himself a long time ago that he wouldn't raise a daughter on carefully managed silence, not after watching what silence had cost a floor full of grown adults just 24 hours earlier. I got fired yesterday, he said, for something I didn't do. Nia set her pencil down slowly, processing this with the same careful attention she gave everything. That's not fair. No, it wasn't. So what happened? I told the truth about it. And it turned out I was in a position where telling the truth actually mattered. So a lot changed very fast. She considered this for a long moment, her small face working through something that looked, for a second, older than 7. Are you going to be okay? Better than okay, Malik said. I think, actually, for the first time in a long time, things are going to be really good. Good, Nia said, satisfied, already picking her pencil back up. Because I need help with fractions, and you're the only one who explains it without making it confusing. Malik laughed. The first real laugh he'd had in almost 2 days, and pulled his chair closer to the table. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up outside Whitfield Logistics' downtown loading dock, and a driver named Marcus walked in to drop off a routine shipment. Priya Anand, now leading the compliance team on the 14th floor under a new reporting structure, greeted him by name and asked about his daughter's recovery from a recent surgery. Because she'd started actually asking people things and remembering the answers, the way a workplace feels different once somebody at the top has made it clear that noticing people is part of the job, not a distraction from it. In the far corner of the newly reorganized floor, now bright with better lighting Malik had personally requested, he stood with Nia beside him. She'd come for a scheduled visit. Bring your kid to work day. Technically, though Malik had quietly arranged for her to come far more often than the calendar suggested she should. He hadn't announced his presence to the floor. He wanted to watch it work first, the ordinary rhythm of it, the everyday version of the thing he'd spent the last several weeks trying to build. He watched Priya answer 3 questions at once without losing patience. He watched a new analyst laugh at something a coworker said, easily, without checking first whether laughing was allowed. Nia watched it too, tucked against her father's side, her small hand wrapped around his. She brought a folder of her own, colored pencil drawings she wanted to tape to the wall of his new office, because she decided, without asking permission, that his office needed some. Is that what it's supposed to look like? She asked, watching the floor move easily around them, nobody flinching, nobody going still at their desk. Malik watched the room a moment longer before answering. Yeah, baby, that's exactly what it's supposed to look like. Nia considered this with the quiet thoroughness she brought to most things that mattered to her. Then she nodded once, satisfied, and reached up to tug his sleeve. "Can we go put my drawings up now?" "Yeah," Malik said, taking her hand properly this time. "Let's go put your drawings up." They walked together toward the elevator, past desks where people were simply working, simply speaking, simply being seen. The ordinary, unremarkable outcome of a decision made weeks earlier by a man who had walked into a building as nobody and left it, briefly, the same way, before coming back to make sure nobody in that building would ever have to disappear into their own silence again. Somewhere above them, on the 32nd floor, a cardboard box that had once held almost nothing, a mug, a charger, a folder, now sat on the corner of a desk that belonged to the chairman of Whitfield Logistics, not packed away, not hidden in a closet, but left out in plain sight, not because the objects inside it mattered, because what they represented did. A father had been underestimated, dismissed, and thrown away by people who looked at him and saw exactly what they expected to see. He had not raised his voice. He had not sought revenge. He had gathered the truth, carried it carefully, and used it only to protect the people who had never had the power to protect themselves. Goodness, it turned out, had not been wasted. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to be recognized, and even then, it asked for nothing in return except the chance to make things right for everyone who came after. That evening, back in the small apartment on the east side of the city, Nia fell asleep before the third page of the lighthouse story, the way she always did, her hand still curled around the edge of her blanket. Malik sat beside her a while longer, the hallway light spilling gently across her face, and thought about how strange it was that the truest measure of everything he'd built that year had nothing to do with a boardroom, a title, or a company that now carried his family's name on its highest floor. It had everything to do with a 7-year-old girl who believed, without a single doubt, that her father would always come home early enough to see the tree she painted, and a man who had made absolutely sure that promise was one he would never have to break.